Rock and metal invasion. Rock and metal invasion. Rock and metal invasion. Rock and metal invasion.
Hi, welcome to Rock and Metal Invasion. My name is Steve. Coming up on the show today, I am doing lesser known American hair metal bands before hair metal existed. Kind of a follow-up, I guess, from the Canadian hair metal before hair metal existed that I did a couple of episodes ago. So yeah, basically following on from that, I'm going to highlight some American bands from the USA who were doing what we might call the hair metal sound, or at least some of the elements of that hair metal sound. Maybe they even had some image aspects to it as well before hair metal really took off. And when I'm talking about hair metal, of course, it wasn't called hair metal at that particular time, but I'm talking about that sort of more that time period between 83 and 92, where hard rock and heavy metal bands had some mainstream success with that sort of sound that we these days, some of us anyway, might call hair metal. But there was actually, that sound was kind of existing. And this has kind of been interesting for me to even discover this, because I think for a long time thought, 84, 85, that was kind of it. Maybe I could go to 83 for some releases, but for the most part, I was checking out anything from mid 80s onwards. The guys had long hair, I'd check it out, sort of thing. But have since, been discovering all these other bands that were putting out great albums that fit that genre, if you want to call it that, or that category of sound that we might call hair metal, even well before that. And yeah, I know, especially, and this is why I'm calling it lesser known, that, especially when we're talking about American bands, there's quite a lot that we're doing it, and well-known ones as well, of course, that were highly influential. Van Halen being a really great example. Of course, you've got the debut Motley Crue album. You've got Aerosmith. So, there are other bands that I could talk about that are prior to hair metal that totally were very influential. But I thought I'd go for those sort of lesser known ones that you might not know about. So if you like this type of music, you could go and check it out. I mean, when you talk about Kiss, I mean, gosh, the 70s, very much an influence on not just hair metal bands, but hard rock and heavy metal bands in general. But even their 1982 album, and that's, if we're saying 1982 is prior to hair metal, there's got a lot of the template for hair metal right there. But I'm not going to talk about those kind of bands. I'm going to talk about some lesser known bands. Now, I'm saying that you may know these bands, but I think for the most part, some of them had limited success, or maybe even some of the people from the band then go on to have more success in other bands. But yeah, so let's get into it. And of course, I'm only talking about bands that I've got in my collection. I've got their album in my collection, and I also, just like I did with the Canadian hair metal before hair metal existed episode that I did, I've created a playlist, so you can check out the playlist for the bands that I've talked about. And again, I'm just going to really highlight one song from the band and from the album, but there could be possibly more than one from the album that's worth checking out, but I'm just going to highlight one song. Okay, so the first band I want to talk about is a band called Touch, and this is their debut album, came out in 1980. And the song I want to highlight is a song called Don't You Know What Love Is. Really great hard rock song that kicks off this album. There's other really good songs as well. I highly recommend this album, but that is the standout song. So 1980, Touch and Don't You Know What Love Is. They did actually release, it did eventually get released. They did actually record a second album, but then it wasn't released, and then it got reissued, or got issued finally many years later. They called it Touch the Complete Work, so it had 2 albums on it. This was only on CD, and then they put out a third album just a couple of years ago. Mark Mangold, he's the guy who I guess is sort of the main man for Touch. You might know him from the band Drive She Said. So here's Drive She Said, put out a couple of albums in the late 80s, early 90s. Very similar actually to Touch, really good stuff. Mark Mangold's also done songwriting with Michael Bolton, And another way you might know Touch as well is from this Monsters of Rock compilation. I think this was around 1980 that this came out, and of course it's just concert recording. And you'll see here it's got some big names, you know, Rainbow, Scorpions, Saxon, Riot, April Wine's even on there. But Touch have one song as well, and they played at that festival that year, and it is the song "Don't You Know What Love Is." So yeah, really good band, good song, and a good album. So worth checking out. That's my first selection: Touch and "Don't You Know What Love Is." All right. Now, I mentioned Michael Bolton. This band's also got a bit of a connection with Michael Bolton because this band is Balance and the album is In for the Count. And the song I'm going to highlight is the title song, In for the Count. Now, Balance probably most well known for the fact that it features Bob Kulick on guitar. And the Michael Bolton connection is, of course, that his younger brother, Bruce Kulick, is the guitarist on the Michael Bolton 1985 album Everybody's Crazy. Bruce also played with Michael Bolton on the Blackjack album that came out, I think, around in the late 70s. But anyway, this is Bob Kulick. But In for the Count, really great song. Like I said, all these songs are on the playlist that you can find the link for the playlist in the description. So check these songs out if you haven't heard this song before. Really good. There's other good songs on this album as well. Undercover Man, that's another good one. But yeah, you've got Pepe Castro on vocals. I don't think he goes on to do too much more. Nothing I'm aware of anyway. But yeah, he sounds fantastic. And actually, I think many members of this band, it's another Michael Bolton connection, end up playing on that 1985 album that Michael Bolton puts out. So not Bob, but Bruce Kulick, and then some of the guys from the band Balance as well. So bit of a surprise I wasn't having, because I just think this title song is fantastic. But there we go. That's my second selection from 1982. I noticed with my Canadian hair metal before hair metal selections, there was a lot of 1982. This one's a little bit varied. I'm actually going into the 70s and even not all just 82. There's some 80 and 81 in here. And this one is probably one of the oldest ones I've picked. And it's 1976. And this is Rex. Now, I think the band is actually called Rex, but I mean, it's basically Rex Smith is the vocalist. So you may know him from being the host of Solid Gold in the sort of early 80s. I think he'd come on and be a host, and sometimes he'd sing. But in the mid 70s, like 76, 77, they put out a couple of quite heavy albums for the time. And so the song I'm going to highlight is 10 Seconds of Love. It is a great song, great riff on it. Like I say, surprisingly heavy, especially even for its time, 1976. I don't have the second album, but I do have this one, and I enjoy that song and quite like the album. Not into a lot of it. Most of my collection's 80s, early 90s, but as far as hard rock, sort of heavy metal sort of music is concerned. But yeah, I discovered this and thought, wow, this is actually quite ahead of its time, I think. So yeah, anyway, it's on the playlist. Check out 10 Seconds of Love, really good. Yeah, Rex Smith kind of didn't really continue, which is interesting, really, because for me, it's like a sound that totally fits in with that hair metal sound. But he kind of, he moved away from the hard rock sounds in the 80s. And, I think he did put out some solo albums, but more pop stuff. Like I said, he was on Solid Gold. He was in the musical Grease that played on Broadway in the late 70s sort of thing. So he's an actor, he's really, I guess, multi-talented, I guess, but he didn't really stick with the rock stuff. But yeah, check out this album, really good. And the song 10 Seconds of Love. All right, next one, another person you might know about, but I'm not sure if you would have necessarily heard this album or heard this song that I'm going to highlight. So the song and the artist I'm going to talk about is Desmond Child and Rouge. Now, this came out in 1979. Actually, they only put out 2 albums, and they both came out in the same year. So this is in the 70s, where sometimes bands would put out 2 albums a year, which seems quite strange to think about in these days. We're lucky to get, an album every sort of 3 or 4 years sometimes from some artists. But yeah, 2 albums in the same year. This is their second and final album. And of course, yeah, Desmond Child If you watch my channel, you probably would have heard me talk about him from time to time because he comes up as a songwriter for many of the hair metal bands that become popular in the mid to late 80s. Of course, even in the late 70s, he's writing with Kiss and having success with the song I Was Made for Loving You, but he continues to write with Kiss throughout the early 80s. And then when he hooks up with Bon Jovi, of course, has massive success, continues songwriting for Alice Cooper, Aerosmith, and other big names. But the song I'm going to highlight is My Heart's on Fire. Really good song, good hard rock, good nice riff. Of course, the interesting thing about this group is it's Desmond Child and Rouge, and it's basically he's got three female singers. But you can already hear on this album how he's able to really, and that's what he's, I think, trying to do. He's trying to mix like pop, R&B with hard rock. And I think, granted, it's a little bit soft. It's not that heavy an album or anything, but it's the song I chose, I think, is really good. So yeah, My Heart's on Fire. That's the selection for this album, the one I want to highlight. Okay, so next one I want to talk about a lesser known band, but there are a couple of people from the band that you may have heard of. Now, this is the band called Speedway Boulevard. Came out in 1980, and they never toured, so this is a studio only. I don't know if that was the idea, but I think my understanding was that was the idea. It was just going to be a studio only band. I think this is the only release, and the song I want to highlight is a song called Rock Magic. They also have a song called Speedway Boulevard, which is also a good one. But yeah, I'm going to highlight Rock Magic. Really good song. The band Balance that I talked about before. This features Dennis Fieldman. So he is Dennis Fieldman. He's bass, and he then goes on to become a member of the band Balance. But it also features Jordan Rhodes on keyboards, who goes on to become a keyboardist in Dream Theater. So there we go. So there's a connection there with Dream Theater. Really good song, Rock Magic. There's a couple of, like I say, a couple of other good songs on here as well. So this is a good album. And for 1980, I think they came out with something pretty good here. But like I said, just one and done. So yeah, we're checking out Speedway Boulevard and the song Rock Magic. Check that one out. All right, next one is a band called 707, and again, this is going to be another title track song I'm going to highlight. The album Megaforce, and the song I'm going to talk about is Megaforce. So this was, I think originally it was written as the theme song for the movie Megaforce, but it's also probably most well known as being the song that you can hear, and I've got the album here, when you listen to Ace Frehley's Comet album and the song Calling to You. It's basically Megaforce, but they've changed the song title, they've changed the lyrics a little bit. One thing I didn't realize is that the song Megaforce has actually got a co-writing credit with Jonathan Cain from Journey. But interestingly enough, when that song is rewritten, and it's just the lyrics are just changed, it's essentially the same song, the credit is taken off and Ace Frehley's name is put on here. But anyway, yeah, and the thing is, I heard Calling for You before I'd heard Megaforce, and I thought, wow, that's probably my favorite song off the album, or one of them. So it was interesting then to find out actually that song exists, but just with some different lyrics, via 707 and the song Megaforce. So good song, really good. Of course, Todd Howarth is the guy who takes the song to Ace Frehley and Frehley's Comet. He's the member of this band, but they've also got Kevin Chevalt, who goes on to become a member of Storm, and also he's a vocalist for Journey for a very short period of time. So yeah, and I think too, I don't know if possibly this is the reason why when Todd Howarth took this song to Ace Frehley, he didn't want to call it Megaforce, because what was his label at the time? Megaforce. So that might have been a bit unusual to be singing a song or have a song on your album that's also your label's name. So that could be part of it as well. So but yeah, good song. I don't actually know that this band that well. I think they'd had albums prior to this, but it's the only one I've got. But yeah, 707 and Megaforce is my next selection. All right. Now, the next one I'm going to talk about, we're going back to the 70s again, but this is one of my favorite bands that is a 70s band. And I don't, like I said, I don't have a large selection of bands from the 70s I'm a big fan of, but I only fairly recently discovered these guys. Once I discovered them, I'm all in on them. All their albums, I've got all their albums and have really been enjoying them. And it's a band that I heard people talk about, but never really sort of, again, maybe because I'm just thinking, 70s, probably won't be my thing, but it's very good. And again, this is a band who put out 2 albums in the same year, and the band is Starz, and the album that the song comes from is Coliseum Rock. So this was the second album that they put out in 1978. And they also put out Attention Shoppers that year as well, which some people don't like, but I think that's still a good album. But yeah, the song I'm going to highlight on here is So Young, So Bad. It's so good. Such a great song. I really love that song. A band called Mayday also recorded the song. In fact, I think that might have been how I first heard that song and thought initially it was a Mayday song. And they actually almost could have been on this list as well, because they put out an album in the early 80s that was very much could have fitted in with the hair metal scene. But yeah, So Young, So Bad is actually a Starz song. This is their 4th album. This ends up being their last album. Like I said, they released 2 albums in 1978. They did regroup, I think, in the early 80s, around maybe 82, and put out an album as known as Hellcats. This was actually really the last album. There's a live album and so forth as well. And, they've got a bit of a cult following, but yeah, they've got a good, cool logo. It's kind of a bit of a mystery. They didn't take off a little bit more. Musicianship is great. They've got a couple of changes actually on this album, which is interesting because it's the second album that came out in the year, but they've got a couple of guys come in. They've actually got a guy called Bobby Massano, and he's known for lots of bands. He's actually plays in a band that's coming up that I'm going to talk about. But also they bring in Orville Davis, and Orville Davis was actually playing for Rex, and he was he's the bass. So he played bass on this album. So there we go. So a bit of crossover here, and now he's playing bass for Starz on their final album. But yeah, So Young, So Bad, really good song. So that's the highlight. That's the song I'm going to highlight for this album. All right, and as I said, Bobby Massano, he's quite well known. He goes on to then play for lots of other bands. He put out quite a good solo album in 1989 as well with Check Me Out. But he also joined this band, Frankie and the Knockouts. Now, he doesn't play on this album. He plays on the next one, which also features, just out of interest, these guys put out 3 albums, and their 3rd album features Bobby Massano, but also Tico Torres from Bon Jovi. So, but it's sort of some well-known guys do end up coming through this band. But it's called Frankie and the Knockouts because the lead singer and songwriter is, I think you say his name, Frankie Pravetti, and New Jersey band. So there's that New Jersey connection, I guess, with Bon Jovi there. And yeah, they put out 3 albums. This one's from 1982. Really good stuff. I mean, they're not super heavy, but when they do the hard rock stuff, they do it really well. And again, connecting to Bon Jovi, you can hear some early Bon Jovi in an album like this. You really can. And especially in the song I'm going to highlight, which is Keep On Fighting. Really good stuff. But there's other songs as well. Now, Frankie Pravetti is probably most well known for the songwriting he did on the Dirty Dancing soundtrack. He actually wrote the songs I've Had the Time of My Life and Hungry Eyes, which were quite big hits. So I guess in the end, after this band not really taking off, he did end up having some success. But yeah, if you like hard rock, this is well worth checking out. 1982, this one came out. There's one before this one. I've got all 3 of their albums. The one before is not bad, but it's not as heavy. This one's a bit more hard rock, and then the same with the next one as well. And they've all the albums have got at least some really good heavy ones on it. They're not super heavy band, but they've got some good rockers and worth checking out. And yeah, check out the song I'm highlighting, Keep On Fighting. It's a good one. All right, so Frankie and the Knockouts from the album Below the Belt, Keep On Fighting. So next one is a band called X, and you probably may have already guessed because it's such a. If you know the band X, I've heard whenever I hear people talk about this band, they talk about usually as one of their favorite songs, "Rock and Roll Party," and so yeah, that's the one I'm gonna highlight. It's from their third album, and it's called Offering. They've really got a real heavy metal kind of look here, haven't they? With I mean, even just being called X and the imagery that they use, but they're not super heavy. But that is a good song, a good hard rock and roll party in the streets. I think it was, modest hit maybe, or got a bit of airplay, they got a bit of success. But then put out a fourth album, and they were actually touring with Motley Crue in 1984. And then, ironically, because car accidents and Motley Crue probably not a good combination, but one of the guys in the band, Michael Osborne, he was killed in a car accident, and who was it? Bobby Barth is the lead vocalist. He also was injured quite seriously, but he recovered, and that I guess that just put a bit of an end to the whole band. But they could have been huge, I think, in the when the hair metal scene took off, because they had some of the sound and everything down there quite nicely in the sort of early 80s. Like I said, they put out 4 albums, and but of course, what happened, and that kind of, I guess, didn't help the band stay together. They did make a comeback. They put out, I think, about maybe 3 albums over the last sort of 30 years. So not a lot, but every now and then an album has come out. I'm not sure what the lineup is, but there we go. Yeah, check that song out if you haven't. X and Rock and Roll Party. All right, the last one I'm going to talk about is a band called Talas, and Sink Your Teeth Into That. Now, this band is most well known for having Billy Sheehan in it. So Billy Sheehan, he actually, I think he quit the band, and that pretty much was the end of the band when he joined David Lee Roth. But the song I'm going to highlight is another title track. It's the song "Sink Your Teeth Into That." But this is a really solid album. This is 1982. This is their second album. They put out an album in 1979 as well. That was their debut album. But yeah, for me, this is the one worth checking out. And they did even release, believe it or not, they actually released their third album 40 years later in 2022, and they called it 1985. But but I mean, Billy Sheehan's a busy guy. Of course, Mr. Big, he ends up sort of having quite a bit of success with, but been in a few different bands as well, and keeps himself busy. But if you haven't heard "Sink Your Teeth Into That," that is a great song, worth checking out. But there's other good ones on here as well. All right, so yeah, that's it. That's my lesser known American hair metal before hair metal existed. Like I said, I think all those songs fit quite nicely into the category of hair metal. Let me know what you think. Maybe there's some other bands that I should be checking out or that I should have mentioned. If there are, let me know in the description. If you like this type of content, make sure you hit the thumbs up, hit the subscribe button so you get notified when I post new episodes. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you later.